Hello, my name is Huesto Enrico, and I know I'm talking with 50 people, and we have got a great topic here that I'm actually really interested to unroll and see how it plays out, which is it's kind of a double-headed topic. The first part of it says what what are what caused the types to be able to coexist with each other. Talk about the origins of the stable societies. Where does stability come from in a society that, like you said, there allows peaceful coexistence? Um, and then number two, to the extent that this answers that first question, I think is interesting and likely to be the case. Which is number two: do groups manifest personality types? There's certain uh, nation states or churches or uh, debate teams or whatever manifest certain personalities. So let's start with the first part of the question. I think it's really interesting that population question ties in with this as well. Are NTs becoming more populous? I would say no. And I don't think that typing is responsive to changes in culture. I don't think personality type is the frequency at which given types emerge into the society as a whole. I don't think it's responsive to metaphysical aspects. In other words, like society needs fewer ESTPs than it used to. Okay, well, now people are going to have fewer kids that are ESTP. I don't think it works like that. I could be wrong. It could actually work like that. It's hard to understand the mechanism by which it would exactly, but it's possible. So I think that we have the percentages we have because at one point in our history, where humanity was a lot more volatile. In other words, a lot more active in shaping the species. When you have a lot of fighting and a lot of death and shit going down, the species gets a lot more shaped than if most species members are able to make it through life peacefully enough and reproduce. So that's the issue of quantities. I think the quantities are not ideal for the current world, but I think they're better than uh, equal, right? Like you wouldn't want to have equal percentages of each type. Which brings to the question of whether groups manifest a type's personality. I think they absolutely do, with the realization that the individuals within the group don't necessarily cooperate with that, participate in it. They may even display differently, but the reason that groups display personality type one, short personality type usually instead of multiple or something like that, is because the group's identity becomes defined, and then individuals within the group define themselves and their membership within the group according to the group's identity in contrast with their own specific things. So it's like, well, the group specifically does this, I specifically do the opposite, so I'm not in agreement with the group on this. That's proof right there that the group does have a specific identity and reflects certain values. Those values will almost always, I think, reflect one or two types, and the rest not so much. And they're going to reflect either it's going to be like an ENTP type group, which is going to be not necessarily orderly, but very egalitarian. I think ENTPs are the most ferociously egalitarian type. I think you could give me an alternative that I would agree with more maybe, but I tend to think that the case. ENTPs are not only
You
egalitarian, but they want to fight about it.
you think that's maybe why INFJs and ENTPs stereotypically get along?
I do think INFJs are also very egalitarian. That's true. You guys might be.
Maybe not so much, or maybe it's more depending on the person. But
Well, I think you're not aggressively egalitarian. This is an important distinction. I think that you're naturally egalitarian, that you're not naturally going to be okay with watching somebody do FE FE harms badly and unfairly. I mean, that's the thing about INFJ is you guys are squeamish about me, right? This is some squeamishness. But because I do it right and I'm attentive to certain lines that I don't cross and um, and I keep the themes I keep coming back to certain core messages that relieve pressure on certain ethics valves within you guys, then you're squeamish about me, but I don't usually super let you down, right? Like I don't usually go too far such that you go, now, see, Eric, you really fucked that up badly. This is what I'm talking about, dude. That's why you don't take all those risks, because when you do fuck up, it makes all your little benefits pointless, because that was a big fuck up. If I did that regularly, you wouldn't be able to watch this because you guys would be too squeamish about it, I think.
so then, what do you think if this doesn't go too far off topic, what do you think the ENTP would get out of the INFJ? Just being able to express their ideas and not have the INFJ be horribly abhorred by them, like another type might be.
It's not just that, it's insight and guidance that's always implicit, never explicit. This is something that ENTP respects and appreciates greatly in the INFJ. They they like Socratic method shit. They want INFJ would be okay. This is the ideal situation for INFJ. They've asked me a question. They know that where I'm going to go with the answer, and it's going to lead me to have some sort of realization about myself. There's no lantern hung on that process in the moment, but 2 weeks later, I go and say that totally worked, and they go, "You're right." That's INFJ's dream right there. It happens fairly often for them, I suspect. That's their, like, my dream is the other kind of "you're right." It's like somebody came and rolled up on me, and I was able to pin them down in a place where they had to sit there and listen to my questions, answer my questions, and at the end, everybody stood there and said, "Well, what do you have to say about it?" And he had to be like, "I was wrong, and you were right, Eric." And that's the kind of thing I want. Though "you're right" thing, but you want the mystical 2 weeks later payoff, and the special quality of a sort of shared. I'll say just a couple little words. You'll understand the whole thing, and we'll both understand the whole thing, and that's because we both have FETI.
I think also with the ENTP being an NEDOM, there's almost like it's not really like true chaos, but there's almost a chaotic feel to the way that the NE operates, where it's just shooting out different possibilities. So to see it be directed in a sort of, not necessarily ordered, but like directed in a way to, as you said, like 2 weeks down the road where they're saying you're right, like to be able to see some sort of culmination come out of it is, like, I think really appealing.
The other thing is, I personally feel as though I've learned more from INFJs than I've learned from any other type. And it's because NI and the audio thing. NI audio is why I think INFJs always have interesting things to teach me. It's where I want to learn most is NI. And I like your guys' teaching style, which is non-explicitly teaching. Even when you are explicitly teaching, it's nice. It's like you understand that I'm driving the learning bus. And most types don't get that. If I say, I want you to teach me how to do this thing, what I really mean is I want to ask you a bunch of questions and direct the pace of my own learning here on this. Some types don't like that. They want to say, okay, no, stop. I'm teaching you this. Now you let me do it the way I want to. You ask me the question. But see, for me, I'm like, yeah, but I know what I need to know, and you don't know what I want to know. So it's me who should be directing and not you. I never have to have this problem with INFJs. I'm not sure why. They let me learn from them as I want to, rather than trying to make me learn from them like they want me to. It's good of you guys. Thank you for that, by the way.
I'm trying to think of an analogy that works. I thought about like the INFJ being more like a shepherd, but the ENTP is not necessarily it's not like a sheep in a pen. It's like that there's a sort of shepherding going on, but it's more like just an accompanying the ENTP where they're going, and just
right.
I think helping them stay on some sort of a general semblance of a track, so that there's a payoff. But
like what you did earlier when you're like getting back to the topic, and and you're not gonna do it in a way that says I'm gonna manipulate it like Eric's unaware that I'm putting him back on topic. I'm just gonna sort of manage that quietly. So you make me aware that you know that I'm aware that you're doing that whole thing, all that subtext shit, that FETI subtext shit that the ESTPs fucking hate. They hate that content.
So then immediately going off that, how can we tie this back into our main topic of using the ENTP and the INFJ as sort of a microcosm of how the greater personality manifests? Or
what was the actual topic though?
Well, we were talking about like part of the topic was like, is there a personality type for groups?
Oh yeah,
so I was using the INFJ and the ENTP as a sort of microcosm.
Right. So I think groups tend to manifest the personality. Well, it depends. Like for example, MBTV is a good example to talk about. They're attempting to be as inclusive as possible, obviously for good reason, and yet even their attempts at loosey-goosey, flexible inclusion have that NTJ signature on them. You know, it's like that group manifests the personality of the guys who run it, because NTJ personality stuff is much more directive. So the things are going to manifest as he wants them to. This is not manifesting because I want it to manifest this way, right? This is manifesting this way because I don't want to manifest it a certain way. You know?
I think that's the NE difference you're kind of talking about there. With the NTJs, there's more of a, not necessarily direction, but it is kind of a direction in a way. It's not that the NTP's incapable of having the direction, it's just maybe not necessarily the point. I don't know if that's accurate.
I mean, I would say I don't concede the battle that's conceded by that, although I agree it's likely to be lost. But what I mean by that is...
Yeah, I'm asking this in more of a question sort of way. I'm
right.
not stating it as like a fact.
and I'm giving this as an answer sort of way. I'm not. I'm not giving it as a counter.
Uh,
Um, I think that I forgot where are we going with that now.
I apologize.
That's okay. Well, just it's like the point being that this manifests as as it does. To the extent that there's a plan, it's so subject to change that it's hard to call it a plan. So, like the identity, one way in which this group manifests the identity of an ENTP is that these things aren't scheduled. Chad had his thing today. Diamond told me last night proudly that she had received an invitation on the email to this hangout today, right? So it's obviously structured a lot more. It's not whoever shows up, or nobody, and I'll just yammer on or whatever. It's outcome driven. And he might say, "Well, that's going to win, Eric, obviously, because that approach has many advantages," which I agree. But what I'm saying is the factor not necessarily considered as much as maybe it should be when you think about those sort of equations is this NTP habit of talking about the thing itself and making that meta level of stuff somehow the more significant factor. Now, whether it turns out to be more significant in measurable outcomes or not, I don't know. But in terms of how I would frame it epistemologically or ontologically or something, I would frame it as, well, there's some sort of sacrifice being made for the improvement in outcomes that is taken out of the hide of like natural growth of dialogue and personality display in a moment, you know. It's good to stay on topic, and it's also good to know sometimes that wherever you're going right now is a good place to be going, and just stay going there. I don't need to, whether we're on topic or not, you know. There's all those things come into play, and I think that there's sort of an internal battle between the NTP's insistence on always having field immersion and field sensitivity, so that we have infinite choices if even the slightest little thing changes, which it always will. So we always have infinite choices. There's like that on one extreme, and the other extreme, it's like, no, we have to have a clear reason why we're doing everything, so everything has an outcome that's understood, the mechanism by which the action leads to the outcome. I don't need to know how it's going to lead to the outcome. I don't need to know that it's going to definitely lead to the outcome. I just want to know that this action at the moment, according to my current understanding of status quo, is moving me in a general area towards where I want to be going rather than the opposite direction. That's all I need to know to justify myself taking a given course of action. That's not the case in MBTV, I can guarantee you that. They want to know that their actions are purposeful.
I have a sort of comment on that, but Barry's in the chat. I think he's wanting you to read some of what he wrote.
Oh, I have to scroll down. I didn't scroll down. Okay, Barry is typing up a storm. They know what you want to learn through NI. Yeah, the evolution of a meta-personality type. I think it starts with the group objective. This gets established by the context in which the group meets and the types involved. E.g., if you had 10 INTPs and 1 ESTP, the context would be probably in a location that directs conversation towards theory and conjecture. The ESTP cannot dominate this group with SE observations because humans talk under the directive of influence. No one cares what you bring to the table, you have no influencing power. Well, of course, it depends on the group's external expectations of the group too. Is the group expected to accomplish anything in the world? Like, is it, if it's the what are they called? The Elks Club. The Elks Club. They've explicitly stated that their job as a club is to sort of do community service stuff. So if they didn't ever do any community service stuff, then they could be held to account for that. Power resides where men believe it resides. Right. Perceptual dominance is certainly a big thing. But the thing is, that group, number one, wouldn't have 10 INTPs and 1 ESTP unless it were an INTP themed group. In other words, like unless we're TI heavy group. And if it were, probably the ESTP wouldn't want to be in that group. But if he did want to be, then he would be an ESTP who would be down with that shit. And that he'd be there because he wanted to be in a INTP identity group. If a car smashes through the window, the ESTP will have precedent of the conversation and will later direct the conversation towards their cognitive stacks. If you now bring five FEs, and they will dominate with their thought process and direct it. Yeah, I got you. This has almost certainly been explained many over. Right. See, but here's the thing. Most groups, though, they have a defined scope. So while it's true that the group might get in a car crash on the way to their group activity or something, getting in the car crash is not actually part of the group activity. And at that moment, it would seem to me they're behaving as a unit because they're together physically, but they're not behaving as representatives of that group in that kind of a moment because it's a starkly unusual moment and they're dealing with it as individuals. I think that's the other thing is that individuals can be a part of a group, but that doesn't mean that's their identity. It's just when they're functioning as part of that group, they may represent differently. Yeah, I'm not trying to bust your chops or anything. I'm sort of riffing off the idea, that's all. I'm not saying it's not a good idea. And I think that it's interesting when you see groups that have either a well-functioning partnership, usually, of types. I don't think you usually have more than two displaying as main identities of a group, so to speak. You have two that are cooperative and get along well, and then that group's going to play out a certain way. And sometimes you'll have two that'll conflict, and that'll play out in a very different way. Seeing a group being fractured by conflicting values from two different sources within is certainly an interesting phenomenon. I got to see a certain amount of that with my old job and the debaters. Some of them leaving that place because they didn't like that. Some of them sticking with that place and being loyal to them. Some of them coming in with me. Some of them wanting to avoid the conflict entirely and just saying, I'm going to go to a third party. Or some of them prioritizing Eric's being too noisy, so I don't like the drama. Some of them, on the other hand, prioritizing, I like the fact that Eric's so straightforward. And it's hard to when a group fractures. That's when the individual types reveal their conflict with the group type. That is why we are hardwired to bail shit. You mean like to bail on stuff, or do you mean bullshit into the typo? I can't tell. Yeah. Well, we're hardwired. I think that's unfair to say we're hardwired to it. I think that we habitually make lots of cognitive mistakes, and we all make some, and some people make them constantly. The problem isn't that we make the cognitive mistakes; it's that we fail to include the fact that we constantly make cognitive mistakes in our metacognition. So we underestimate our own likelihood to be wrong, and it doesn't matter unless we're talking about actual concretized action. Then it matters a lot. The problem is we talk about what we're going to do in an abstract hypothetical world and don't quite understand that when we actually do it, it's then you have to actually experience the outcomes It's no longer just hypothetical. Like somebody in Sacramento signs some new law or votes for a law, and to them it's an abstract exercise, and they're doing their good job of shepherding society or whatever, because they never go and actually experience it in action. And they think that they're still in the hypothetical world. They have no sensory experience of it, and it doesn't seem real to them. So that's what I think is way more for wired and bullshit. Wired and bullshit is that the best thing we could do is to include that knowledge as much as possible into our own understanding of ideas and policy prescriptions by ourselves and others, and in regards to our own beliefs, quote unquote. Other thoughts about the group behavior?
If if Jay, Matt, or Barry or anyone else doesn't have anything at the moment, I'd like to go back to what we were kind of talking. Okay, I'd like to go back to what we were talking about with the NTJs, and the NTPs and stuff like that, and the NFJs. I was just trying to think about that. How you were talking about the NTJs being a bit more
Outcome oriented.
what was that? Outcome oriented. I was trying to think of it like the NFJ NTJ difference, and I think the NTJs are more like you reap what you sow, sort of, whereas the NFJs are more about cultivation, which I think maybe is why there's the NTP appeal.
Right. Yeah. Well, in fact, this. I think I reference a lot that is a good idea to just throw seeds around everywhere. That's an NFJ idea. That's Corey's words, not mine, and I adopted them. As soon as I heard it, I was like, "Yeah, that is a good idea." I took it way further than he probably meant it, or ever does himself. He's not. NFJs are great at agreeing with us about that it's a good idea to do a lot of stuff.
I kind of understand we were talking about. There might be something that I'll get an idea. Like you're talking about throwing seeds around. Like I brought up what I just brought up, like with the cultivation. I don't necessarily know what I mean in the entirety of what I'm talking about. It's just sort of like an impression I get when I was talking about cultivation. But you talked about throwing out seeds and whatnot, and I'd like to.
It's long-term payoff. Like, look, here's the thing. Let's say you are an author of a book right now, but it's written in a pseudonym, okay? And this book is taken off. It's huge. It's the book's called Why Women Love a Man in a Suit or something like that. And it's full of I don't know. Somehow you've tapped into that sort of 50 Shades of Grey kind of audience, okay? It's huge. And now you're in a workplace, and you're walking around with the knowledge that, first of all, I'm a super good, successful writer and make a lot of money on that. I don't really need to be at the job anymore. We're going to stick it out here for about 6 months or so before I quit. I'm going to wind down here. This is your plan. You're going to use this in a way that exploits the glorious time potentialities of it. Whereas ENTP is likely to walk in the door and say, "Hey, guess what, guys?" You're going to milk it for all its juicy glory. You're going to be like, you're going to wait for that person who assumes little of you, right? You're going to wait for that to happen. And then you're going to somehow maneuver it so that he finds out at an ideal location and time in front of certain people, including you, so that you can see his facial expression as he goes from confused to remembering his own previous thoughts to impressed to, and then
Ooh, sorry, I got to interject here. I just got an impression in my mind that what you're talking about is, for an NFJ, the gloriousness of being able to see a physical manifestation of an aha moment.
Yeah, that's what I mean by, that's what you mean by cultivation.
Yeah.
That shit's great.
Seeing something come to fruition.
I am so impressed by you guys doing that shit because that stuff's really hard. I cannot keep my tongue bit, you know?
Yeah, I guess to use a metaphor and an analogy, to me, I view the NTPs as like, especially the ENTPs, as like the people who have the seeds to throw. I know I want to throw some seeds, but you guys just have them in abundance. I only got so many seeds I can use. I want to cultivate a whole field, and you guys are like, well, shit, here you go, and you just start running around throwing them.
Well, I will also say this. I may underestimate the doiness of INFJs a bit because my personal best friend INFJ is pretty lazy. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's type specific. I know you guys are kind of known to be a little bit like, it's not. I don't need to put too much importance in that thing, really. You're known to be a little bit like that, but I also know you guys get threes in the mix, like ENTPs do. There are play ENTPs who don't have three in the mix, and those play ENTPs don't tend to ever get anything done. And then there are ENTPs with three in the mix who do tend to get shit done. Probably the same thing's true with INFJs, I would guess, or at least a starting spot for an idea.
Barry asks, do any types dislike the INFJs? To which JMAT immediately responds, yes.
I don't know. Who dislikes INFJs?
JMAT says the ones that don't give a fuck.
Who doesn't give a fuck? ESTPs?
Maybe.
I mean, probably not too much, right? Because, look, I think you guys are I'd say you guys are the most socially graceful of the 4FE users in the first two spots. For sure. But I think you have it won by a goodly distance. And you're with other socially graceful fours in this. I'm talking about, I think it goes like this. In terms of the most socially graceful, it goes INFJ, then ISFJ, then ESFJ, then ENFJ.
Really? So you think the ENFJs at the bottom?
Well, I mean, they're still better than all the other non-FJs.
Right, I know. I'm just saying. Yeah. It's like they win an award. It's just they win the tin cup, not the gold.
Right. They're the worst of the best group.
Yeah. I think it also varies on the person. Definitely, I think it really matters for an INFJ. I think it's a hit or miss thing in terms of headspace, where you're at, and kind of what your goal is in a conversation. Like with me, if I want to share something about myself, or if I'm in a social situation for me, then I'm a lot less likely to respect the social graces and be more sort of ambitious towards my own ends.
Well, I think an important factor to consider is you guys are the one, you guys have in first, which means that you're going to have a certain increased breadth over, say, the SFJs, right? Mm-hmm. And also, because in ahead of F, you've got a perceiving function first, which means you're going to be more comfortable in a state of immersion. And then the other thing is you've got TI third, which means you've got more breadth. You use that FE to get along fine with feeling people, but you've got TI, so you're going to get along fine with thinking people. You're going to be interested in thinky stuff. And the reason ENTP and INFJ are going to get along especially well is because, like ENTP, you've got that combination of things where FE is really important to me, but TI tends to knock it over a lot. It doesn't work that way for INFJ FE is really important to them, and TI tends to support it all the time. So, and that it makes your life, it makes you the most socially graceful type, is what it does. I think.
I know. I
Just
think
don't
Jay.
be an Enneagram 1.
Yeah, I know, because I could basically feel J-Matt chuckling and sort of having his own snarky reaction to that, just because he's a type 1 and he likes to think of himself as a robot. I see him comparative to like INTPs or some INTPs.
He's the most socially playful version of that ever, right? So he's not displaying just as like, oh, robotic kind of INTP-ish INFJ. He's displaying as an INFJ displaying as those things, which is much more protective of the audience than if an NTP plays those things.
He's not a Dalek from Doctor Who. He's a guy in a Dalek costume at Comic-Con.
I don't know what a Dalek is.
A robot.
Exterminate.
Oh, but now I know what it is. It's
Exterminate.
that old video game. What's it called?
That was a TV show called Doctor Who.
Yes, I know that. I understand that you're referencing that. But there was an old.
Oh, you're saying there's something else that's a video game?
An old video game in which the thing would say, "Exterminate the humans," and then it would open the doors, and the robots would all come at you, and you try to shoot them all. I forget what it was called. It was popular back in the days of video arcades. That's when I started playing video games. When I first started playing video games, you went to the arcade and you put a quarter in it to play it, you know?
Yeah, there was something I wanted to talk about.
Go for it.
Yeah, like on the subject of playfulness, it's just that I suppose you could say that my social presence can be very adaptable, dependent upon what I think is necessary in a situation. It's like necessary? So how do you decide what's necessary? I don't know. I just do it. But the point is that I'm not going to be doing certain things in an environment where I think that this behavior is not going to be not necessarily acceptable, but will not achieve positive results.
How is this going to play? Is something that is you're aware of, is what you're saying. How is this shit going to play?
Yeah.
You're very aware of that. So that's what I mean by an INFJ displaying those things. The INTP is much, much more likely to be unaware or delayed awareness of those things. It's not that they can't be aware of them, it's just that they're probably prioritizing something else at the moment, you know? Yeah, I do find INFJ the most socially graceful, and also notoriously the most charismatic, right? People are really drawn to Corey. Like, everybody loves the shit out of him. I think the reason he and I are best friends is because I'm the only person in his life who can see through at least some of his bullshit, right? It's not bullshit. I don't mean to say it's bullshit, but
No. Say bullshit.
Well, it's bullshit in the sense that any FE is bullshit, but it's also not bullshit in the sense that FE is not bullshit sometimes, you know. So it's
The thing.
It's just that most people don't understand what's going on the surface because ENTPs and INFJs have a certain similarity that allows us to understand each other, I think, is the gist of it.
I think there's also a draw to that for INFJs. I guess I'm sort of speaking for the group, which maybe I shouldn't, but I guess more so for me, there's a draw to that ENTP ability to see through the bullshit, because there's plenty of stuff that I do that later I look back and I'm like, why did I say that? I don't even necessarily agree with that. And it's like, I was trying to, it was those social graces. I was trying to be charismatic in the moment, and I think it's refreshing to get somebody who can sort of, almost like in a more playful way, sort of identify, hey, you're bullshitting right now.
But it's appreciatively. You see, that's the thing.
Right.
I'm not calling you out on your bullshit. I'm like, dude, that's so cool what you just did. Nobody there in that group over there that you were talking to knows what you just did. But I know what you just did, and it was fucking rad. You like to think you're not manipulative, huh? I like that. That kind of shit. I like that.
We
That's my
are.
INFJs. Yeah, you are. You're totally manipulative. So are
So
we.
in a
So are ENTPs. It's fine.
in a
Don't,
in a
don't worry
previous
about it.
video, you had talked about, and I think this also ties back in again to the whole, like social personality type and whatnot, or like of a group or something like that. Is like in a previous video you talked about the fourth slot being the slot where we are willing to receive infinite help. Well, then what about the fifth slot? Because for you that would be NI. For me, that's NE. You think that's another
Trust
thing?
one. It's the trust one. So supposedly, and I agree with this completely, that if I want to swindle somebody, I should swindle an NI dom because they're naturally going to trust me, and vice versa. If if I'm going to be swindled by somebody, it's going to be an NI dom because I'm going to naturally trust them. The reason is because the part of the intuition that I have to use always in order to for my NE to do anything that I have to rely on without having really any control over, that I value immensely because I know everything else is predicated on the blind half of it. You guys understand that it's all in front of you. So I go, see, I knew it was there. I knew that NI was there the whole time. I knew I've been standing on it, I've been pushing off against it. It's relieving to me to see it, at least that you see it out in the open, you know?
Yeah. It's like it's so strong that you know that you need it, but you don't know quite how to access it freely, like you do with any.
Right.
So,
And
yeah,
often
I
have
think
to
it works
wait
vice
for it.
versa.
Often
Yeah.
I have to wait for it. So, like last night, I spent a long time trying out little song ideas, trying to find one that was going to be to deserve to happen, to just sort of unroll as they do when something catches. Well, that catch moment is me waiting for NI to tell me, there, that thing. You were screwing around, you're listening back to it, and you go, that's fucking cool. I like that part right there. I'm
Is
gonna
that
make a note
the
of
was
that.
that the Moisture song? The freestyle?
That was the last thing I attempted after hours and hours of failures that were different strategies. Some of it freestyling, some of it just
Oh,
playing the guitar, some of it blah, blah, blah. And that one I thought, okay, I actually like this. This one's going up. Finally, I can
y-
now go to bed. I
so
got
do you
something down.
think that do you think that maybe that's why? Because I read how someone had given you a dislike, and you were wishing that they had explained it because you wanted to know why exactly they didn't like it. Do you think it was because, like, from? Do you think that has anything to do with the NI perspective of like you had to wait for it, and because of that, it like felt like it took an extra long time?
I don't feel like
Uh,
I know whether my music stuff, I know very certainly whether it's good or not, whether I like it or not, for a while, like a few days, a week, something.
uh,
And so when I say a thumbs down, I think I have multiple theories about it. One of which is there's a looseness to the song that borders and probably crosses the border into just being sloppy and lazy and reckless in the middle by when I just had this long pause. But I actually feel as though my NI is telling me when I come back in the way I do, it just happens to work right and it sort of rescues it. I feel it does, in fact. So it might be that though. They might have concluded no, it doesn't rescue it, and they didn't buy that recapture what they thought they lost, but now they haven't actually lost it. It didn't work like you think it did, Eric. That's one possibility. Another possibility is they don't like the goofy lyrics or the goofy theme, ointment and moisture, stuff like that. That's a possibility. A third possibility could be it's somebody who really doesn't like me and periodically just goes around and starts thumbs down in my videos or something. I don't know. It could be like Jeff Chen or something who just must hate me by now. After I've lambasted him so thoroughly on YouTube. But I don't know what it is. I wish I did know. That'd be cool to know.
So is it like because they gave a dislike without an explanation, it like cuts out that ability for there to be a cultivation? It feels more like it's a whack-a-mole on your innie. Like, I mean,
No, I
like,
don't blame the person for not giving an explanation. I don't think that the person ought not have done that. I don't think the person's even. I appreciate the feedback, even though I wish I had more information about it. But I still appreciate the feedback, and it's something that helps me either know more about this song, or know more about feedback, or know more about how I ought not assume I know much about feedback, and just try to hone the NI. It's gonna work on some level to inform me. You know, I'm just curious. It would be
yeah.
really cool to know, because if it is something specific that I've already identified as a potential thin spot, then I go, okay, the impact of that was worse than I thought. But I was right. That's a thin spot, and now I see that thin spot is so bad that it loses people so much that they put thumbs down. Because that's kind of hard to do, right? It's like most times if you have a bad video, people will just stop watching it. It's just boring. To earn a thumbs down, it has to be like have some oomph behind its badness, usually.
Alright. Reading through the chat.
Eric, can you answer this question? Hold on. We're having a little discussion in the chat, and we're talking about what medium do waves transverse?
Light waves specifically.
Yeah,
Light waves, what medium do they transverse?
yeah.
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is space, but
What are its parts? What's moving?
okay, so I would say that light's nature is that which necessitates distance by its very existence. In other words, the nature of light is that it travels at the speed of light. To travel at the speed of light, you have to have a lot of distance to travel, right? Like, or at least some distance to travel. You can't. If light's nature, as I think it is the least static thing in the universe. It's the least static thing in the universe. So, my take on it is,
I just think there's something it's interacting with within space. Like there's a field like that is generated by space itself.
you might imagine as well that the additional weight came not from the light but from the observation. Observation's a force, we know that, and yet it's heretofore unmeasured as a force vector independent of the obvious human measurements that we have recognizing it in ourselves. So,
I don't think that means we can't perform a calculus to understand how it works.
to understand how what works, observation?
Light.
All right. Well, look. The notion of light is unseverable from both time and space, right? That our time and space supervene upon light or vice versa. And we're not exactly sure which, but that they're definitionally intertwined in ways that we can't understand one without the other. So you can't understand light without time and space. You can't understand space without light and time. You can't understand time without light and space. And so it's weird to try to question them. Well, I don't know if they self-generate or not. I mean, the thing is, when you have three-legged stools, and you note that with these three legs, the stool stands. With any one of the three legs gone, the stool falls over. And then you say to yourself, well, how is it then that the stool ever came to be? Because wouldn't you have to go one leg, then two legs, and in both those states it would be falling over the whole time? How would you put that third leg on? Oh, well, you turn it upside down.
The way
There's
I
some
imagine,
equivalency. There's some equivalency here. I don't know exactly what it is, but that's how it works with the universe too. The three are mutually interdependent to keep things standing upright. And before it was that way, the stool was upside down somehow.
in my understanding, I think waves they don't really exist, but rather are forms we get from understanding a picture of multiple things working together. So I think that like how a circle is measured by pi itself, like you have to understand the ratios that we're measuring the things to begin with, because it's just a concept we're working with rather than the thing in itself. But I think the thing in itself is some kind of field that has
Right.
intermediate charges that can distinguish themselves within space.
Okay.
So that
But okay, let me hold up on that last piece of that. But I want to talk about the fact that it's a field. So this is the thing. A wave is this. It is irregularities, patterned irregularities within a field, not involving the objects in the field.
yeah.
Patterned irregularities within the field itself, not irregularities within the interaction of the objects and the field. Those sort of a perfect example of this is a sound wave. A sound wave is a regular variance within the field. Now, we might say that the objects within the field are the words or something, the words or the pitch or whatever else we're saying or singing. But those objects are only metaphysical. They're meaning-based objects, not physical objects. And the field itself is the thing that's actually changing. But we can't understand it as that way because we need a referent to understand it, and we typically use objects in the field as the referent.
That's how I felt about electrons at first, but then I discovered that when you shoot an electron at another force or a wall, it can bounce off at a particular angle. So that angle shows that there's a curvature which it can exchange its force for another direction.
Which
So that they are in some way.
I want you to explain this better. Go ahead. I want to hear
So that they are in some way rounded, so that when a car crashes into another car, if it crashes head on, all that force is distributed backwards. So some electrons will bounce backwards, but if it's hit at an angle, the car turns that frontward velocity into sideways velocity, and that force becomes transmitted.
So you're
So it
saying
becomes another angle.
Electron behavior is the behavior of objects within a field, not variations in the field itself.
Yeah, but how do those interact?
Well, let's see what Barry says. Electromagnetic waves are produced whenever charged particles are accelerated, and these waves can subsequently interact with any charged particles. Electromagnetic radiation is associated with those electromagnetic waves that are free to propagate themselves, radiate without the continuing influence of the moving charges that produce them because they have achieved sufficient distance from those charges. I'm going to have to read this again because this is dense and I'm not understanding it quite all the way the first time. Electromagnetic waves are produced whenever charged particles are accelerated. And by charged particles, you mean protons and electrons? And these waves can subsequently interact with any charged particles. Okay, but that doesn't answer the question of what the wave is.
What is? Yeah.
Electromagnetic radiation is associated with those EM waves that are free to propagate themselves, radiate.
It's just a measurement
the
of
continuing
force.
influence of the moving charges that produced them. Because, okay, now this is the definition of it here. Electromagnetic radiation is essentially the continuing influence of moving charges that have ceased actively interacting with the system. Very right? The continuing influence of previously acting objects within the system upon the system after the objects have stopped actively interacting with it. That's the question. There. Is that right? Is my thing right? Did what I just say match your understanding?
Mine?
The electromagnetic waves that compose electromagnetic radiation can be imaged as a self-propagating transverse oscillating wave of electric and magnetic fields. Imagined as a self-propagating transverse oscillating wave of electric and magnetic fields. So
there are two fields interacting with one another. There's the electric field, which goes in one direction, and in the opposite direction, it turns for its cosine for the magnetic field. So they interact with one another at a certain interval.
Okay. So, fine. I mean, the thing is, what sounds to me like going on here is that it's something a bit circular, that we're defining the objects and their charge in relation to the impacts they have, namely waves, and then we're defining waves in terms of the objects that are charged that have influence. In other words, it links back to causality ultimately, and it seems a bit circular to me. But I mean, I don't understand it that well. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying my gut here is tingling a little bit on circularity. So, interesting though, fascinating for sure. These magnetic and electric fields you're talking about, are they? I know how we can deduce magnetic fields from watching how they move physical objects around them, like put iron shavings or something. You can see how the magnetic field will form the same shape every time. The question then, though, still remains. In that instance, you're seeing the field influencing the objects. We're defining the field as that which is influenced by the objects. So, what exactly is the field?
I just like to measure it by its force. I just like to think of it as a force, that you're just inputting a variable. That we can only observe the effect of it. I don't think we can really observe the field.
I have to think about this more. This is trippy. It's trippy actually. This trying to understand fields which are non-distinct entities, either time or space objects. Trying to understand them requires us to concretize them into a static word that represents them, and yet trying to understand them, you necessarily go through this period of going, well, it's not a static thing, so, and now my brain is starting to mush a little bit because it's like, Eric, too much TI. When the TI gets, I can do TI well as long as I have good moduled out things that I can deal with big chunks like this, and I don't have to go too deep in the details. When I start getting too deep in the details, or have an idea like this that throws big wrenches and shit, my TI goes, ay, what are you doing here? You know?
Because I don't really observe it from the phenomena. I don't think of it as phenomena, but as, like, variables.
What's Planck's theory? I have an atom. It's right here. It has electrons. It does. It's only got 2 electrons because it's a helium atom. Is that how many helium has? 2?
I like that theory too. I really like quantum physics.
My atom has just absorbed a packet of energy. Its energy has been determined by its frequency. By the frequency of its what? Frequency describes the number of times something happens over a duration. So what's the thing that's happening?
Yeah.
Is it going around a circle? I think it just goes around a circle.
I think it's meeting a point. Or meeting a variable.
J-Matt, that's totally not helpful. That is not a helpful answer.
You have to think of this relativistically because the circle doesn't always move at the same speed. Sometimes it goes and the traveling of it interferes with the variables that it's interacting with. So that you have to take account that something is moving in one direction while other things aren't.
Okay, well, here's the thing. This is getting a lot more sciencey than I normally get. I like science as long as it stays pretty close to the territory of philosophy. I like this. I'm interested in it, but I have to concede that when you start talking about equations, Maxwell's equations, I don't know what those are. I don't know what that is referring to.
Those are electric equations, yeah.
Electric equations?
Hey, Eric.
Yeah.
Yes?
If this ends up deviating into another topic, you should probably end this video and start a new topic.
Thank you, Ken. You're a gentleman, a scholar, and a reader of fine literature. I shall do so forthwith. Forthwith. You mean right now? Yeah, I do. That's why I said forthwith.